This is Jacob Friedman.
You're looking at something that on the surface feels almost like a glitch in the geopolitical matrix. If you have been following the narrative coming out of Beijing for the last few years, you know the script by heart. It is usually characterized by wolf warrior diplomacy, sharp rebukes of Western hypocrisy, and a deep, simmering hostility toward the G7 nations that align themselves too closely with American hegemony. We have grown accustomed to a China that scolds, a China that lectures, and a China that freezes out its critics. But if you look at what is happening right now, specifically regarding Canada and Mark Carney, you are seeing something profoundly different. You are seeing praise. You are seeing warmth. You are seeing the kind of rhetorical embrace that is usually reserved for China's oldest ideological allies, not a Western liberal Democrat from a NATO country. The Chinese media isn't just reporting on Carney's visit. They are actively cultivating a narrative of respect around him. They are calling him pragmatic. They are calling him a serious leader. In the heavily curated ecosystem of Chinese public opinion, where nothing happens by accident, this sudden shift in tone is jarring. It makes you stop and ask, what exactly is going on here? Why is the Chinese state apparatus, which has spent the better part of a decade painting Canada as a helpless American vassal, suddenly deciding that Mark Carney is a man they can do business with? Most people seeing these headlines are likely reading them as a standard diplomatic thaw. You might think, oh, well, trade relations are normalizing, that's nice. Or perhaps you view it with skepticism, assuming it's just another photo op designed to boost poll numbers back home. But if you stop there, you are missing the actual story. You are missing the tectonic shift that is happening just beneath the surface of these pleasantries. This isn't just about soybeans or canola, and it certainly isn't just about being polite. This is about the collapse of the old world order and the frantic, high-stakes attempt to build something stable in its wreckage. To understand why Chinese media is singing Carney's praises, you have to understand the vacuum that Donald Trump has created on the world stage. We are watching a tactical realignment in real time. The official story is simple enough. Mark Carney is traveling to Beijing. He is being received not just as a visitor, but as a state guest, an invitation extended directly by Xi Jinping. That distinction, state guest, is the kind of diplomatic code that signals we are taking this seriously. It is the first time a Canadian leader has made a state visit of this caliber in nearly a decade. On paper, it is a diplomatic reset. It is a chance to talk. But let's be honest about why that surface story is woefully incomplete. It implies that this is happening in a vacuum, as if Canada and China just decided out of the blue to be friends again. It ignores the elephant in the room, or rather, the chaos agent in the White House. The reality is that this visit is a direct reaction to the instability radiating from Washington. Beijing hasn't suddenly fallen in love with Canadian liberalism. They haven't had a change of heart about our human rights record or our alliances. What they have realized is that in a world where the President of the United States treats traditional alliances like protection rackets and uses tariffs as a blunt instrument of economic warfare, stability is the most valuable currency on the planet. China sees Carney as a serious, reliable, and crucially pragmatic leader, precisely because they have watched him stand up to Donald Trump without engaging in the kind of unhinged theatrics that characterize the current American administration. When Chinese state media praises Carney, they aren't just complimenting him. They are subtweeting Trump. They are holding Canada up as an example of what rational Western engagement looks like, contrasting it with the erratic, grievance-fueled unilateralism coming out of the U.S. We need to look at the system behind this. We need to understand the broader historical pattern that brought us to this moment. For years, the relationship between Ottawa and Beijing wasn't just cold, it was frozen solid. We all remember 2018. We remember the arrest of Meng Wanzhou. We remember the retaliatory detention of the two Michaels. It was a dark, ugly chapter that seemed to confirm the worst fears about China's willingness to engage in hostage diplomacy. That trauma didn't just disappear. It hardened public opinion in Canada and entrenched a deep suspicion of Beijing's motives. For nearly a decade, the diplomatic channels were effectively shut down. There was no dialogue, only accusations. So for China to pivot from that hostility to this current love bombing of Mark Carney requires a massive strategic recalculation. And it is actually China that has changed its policy more than Canada has. While Ottawa has been trying to quietly reopen these frozen channels, driven by the pragmatic need to not have our economy completely destroyed by a trade war, Beijing's calculus shifted because their own economic engine is sputtering. They are dealing with slowing growth, a property crisis, and rising global pushback against their economic policies. They can no longer afford to be at war with everyone at the same time. But there is a deeper layer here, one that touches on the very nature of sovereignty in the 21st century. The praise for Carney isn't just about economics, it's about the optics of independence. By welcoming Carney, Xi Jinping is trying to show the world that China can manage stable relations with G7 countries, even through a very stormy period of geopolitical rivalry. It is a performance of maturity. It is Beijing saying, look, we are the adults in the room. We can do business with the West, provided the West acts rationally. And rationally in this context means not like Donald Trump. This is why the visit is being framed as long overdue. From Beijing's perspective, not having working ties with Canada looks bad for their narrative of global leadership. They have been watching Canada carefully over the last year. They saw how Carney handled pressure from Washington. They saw how he refused to be bullied by threats of tariffs and how he continued to engage multilaterally instead of retreating inward into an America First style of isolationism. That matters to China in a world where Trump has made unpredictability a feature, not a bug. Beijing is actively seeking stable relationships with G7 countries to counterbalance American chaos. And Canada, under Carney, fits that profile perfectly. This brings us to the uncomfortable question of who benefits and who pays in this new arrangement. We often talk about geopolitics as if it's a game of chess played by leaders in suits, disconnected from the lives of ordinary people. But the praise Mark Carney is receiving in Chinese media is directly linked to the livelihoods of farmers in Saskatchewan and auto workers in Ontario. It is linked to the price of your groceries and the stability of your job. The system we are talking about here is global trade, and right now that system is breaking down. The U.S. is tearing up the rule book, imposing tariffs that hurt its allies just as much as its adversaries. In that environment, Canada simply cannot afford to be dependent on a single market. We have seen what happens when we put all our eggs in the American basket, only for the Americans to smash the basket because they're in a bad mood. Diversification is no longer just a buzzword, it is a survival strategy. And China knows this. They know that Canada is vulnerable. They know that Carney is looking for options, and they are offering an open door precisely when Washington is slamming theirs shut. This is why the praise is so effusive. It's a seduction. It's a signal to the Canadian public and the Canadian business community that there is an alternative to American bullying. But we have to be clear-eyed about what this means. This isn't about trust returning magically. As I said, the scars of the last few years are real. This is about strategic necessity. You know, the Chinese media isn't praising Carney because they like his personality. They are praising him because he represents a wedge. He represents a G7 leader who is willing to chart a course that is distinct from American foreign policy. For China, that is a massive win. It weakens the narrative of a united U.S.-led Western front against Beijing. If they can peel Canada away from the most extreme versions of American containment strategy, they win. And for Canada, well, the calculation is that we need leverage. We need to show Washington that we have other friends, or at least other options. It is a high wire act. Carney is walking a line between engaging with a superpower that has a terrible human rights record and protecting Canada from an ally that has become economically predatory. It is not a comfortable place to be. But when you see those headlines, when you see the clips of Chinese citizens speaking warmly about Canadian leadership, don't mistake it for genuine affection. It is a reflection of a world in flux, where old alliances are fraying and new, uneasy partnerships are being forged out of necessity. This is the hidden story. It's not about a diplomatic visit. It's about a global realignment. We are watching the end of the unipolar moment where the U.S. called all the shots and the beginning of a messy multipolar reality where countries like Canada have to hustle to survive. Carney's reception in Beijing is the proof that the game has changed. And if we don't understand the rules of this new game, we are going to get played. Diplomacy begins with conversation. And for nearly a decade, that conversation simply wasn't happening at this level. Now it is. And for a lot of people watching from the prairies, this isn't about grand theories of international relations or the shifting tectonic plates of global power. For Canadian canola farmers, this trip is not abstract geopolitics. It is survival. We have to look at what happens when these high-level diplomatic feuds actually touch down in the real world. When Beijing shut the door on Canadian canola, it wasn't just a line item in a trade report. It was a targeted strike. Family farms took massive hits. Entire regions felt the pain of a market evaporating overnight because of a dispute that had nothing to do with the quality of their crop and everything to do with the arrest of a tech executive in Vancouver. So when we talk about a reset, we aren't just talking about warm handshakes in the Great Hall of the People. We are talking about the economic viability of rural Canada. The stakes are unmistakably high, and China has been very clear about one thing: those tariffs can be revisited. But, and there is always a but when you are dealing with a superpower, it requires Canada to be willing to have an honest, pragmatic conversation. Carney understands this, and so does Beijing. The leverage is there, but leverage cuts both ways. If canola is the bait, we need to talk about the hook, because canola is only half the story, and frankly, it's the easier half. The real pressure point in this relationship, the thing that is keeping strategists in Washington and Ottawa awake at night, is Chinese electric vehicles. This is where the rubber meets the road, literally and figuratively. Canada imposed tariffs on Chinese EVs, a move that was driven partly by domestic anxiety about protecting our auto sector. But let's be honest, it was also driven by immense pressure from the United States. It was a move that immediately triggered retaliation against Canadian agriculture. Now, the equation on the table is simple, but it is deeply uncomfortable. The proposition is stark. China removes tariffs on canola, and in exchange, Canada reconsiders its tariffs on Chinese EVs. This is not an easy decision. It is a political minefield. Canada's auto sector is already under incredible strain. Manufacturing jobs matter. They are the backbone of the middle class in Ontario. Any move on EVs will have immediate, tangible domestic consequences. But here is the deeper reality that makes this decision so excruciating. Sticking with the status quo isn't working either. Donald Trump's tariffs have already battered Canada's auto industry. The protectionism coming out of Washington hasn't shielded Canadian workers. It has squeezed them. So Carney is now weighing a hard truth. Diversification comes with trade-offs. You cannot pivot away from an abusive economic relationship with the U.S. without offering something of value to the new partner you are courting. From China's perspective, the logic is brutal in its simplicity. They will remove the tariffs on our farmers if we remove the barriers to their cars. But from Canada's perspective, that decision has to take into account what kind of future we want for our auto sector. This isn't just about letting in a few cheap sedans. There is a reason Chinese electric vehicles are at the center of the global debate right now. It is not just about price. It is about scale, speed, and industrial capacity. While the West was debating the timeline of the green transition, China was building the world's most advanced EV manufacturing ecosystem. They built it from the ground up, from the mines that extract the lithium to the battery supply chains, all the way to the assembly lines, at a pace that no other country has matched. That is why Chinese EVs are now competitive, not just on cost, but on quality, range, and technology. This is why governments in Europe, the United States, and beyond are paying such close attention. Chinese EVs are no longer a future threat. They are a present one. And that creates both a massive challenge and a strange, counterintuitive opportunity for Canada. If Canada limits its engagement to simply importing Chinese EVs, the benefits are narrow. You get lower prices for consumers, sure. You get more choice in the market, which is useful for hitting climate targets. But that is a limited win. It turns Canada into a consumer of Chinese tech, sending money out while our own industrial base withers. The bigger opportunity, the one that requires a visionary kind of industrial strategy, lies elsewhere. It lies in manufacturing. If Canada were to move beyond just importing cars and begin hosting Chinese EV manufacturing or assembly plants, the economic impact could be transformative. We aren't talking about a few sales jobs at a dealership. We are talking about tens of thousands of jobs, not just on factory floors, but across supply chains, logistics, research, and supporting industries. We are talking about battery production, component manufacturing, charging infrastructure, engineering, and design. This is the piece of the puzzle that often gets lost in the China versus the West narrative. Canada actually has the raw materials. We have the critical minerals. We have the skilled workforce. We have the clean energy advantage needed to support EV manufacturing at scale. What we have lacked is a diversification of partners to actually build the stuff. This is where Chinese EV firms become relevant, not as conquerors, but as potential partners in reindustrialization. For Canada, this wouldn't be about replacing domestic automakers or shutting out American companies. It would be about building parallel capacity. It would be about strengthening the industrial base so that we aren't reliant on a single market that frankly has shown it doesn't care if our industry lives or dies. It is about positioning Canada as a serious player in the global EV transition rather than just a supplier of raw materials to the US. Of course, the moment you say Chinese manufacturing on Canadian soil, the alarm bells go off. And they should. This would require rigorous safeguards. It would require strict labor standards, environmental rules, and national interest protections to ensure we aren't just importing China's labor practices along with their capital. But done correctly, it could turn a trade dispute into an industrial strategy. And that is why this conversation is happening now, because the global EV race isn't slowing down, it is accelerating. And Canada has a chance not just to participate, but to shape where the next generation of manufacturing actually happens. For decades, the Canadian economic model was simple. We relied overwhelmingly on the United States. We sold them our energy, we built cars with them, we fed them our agriculture. That model worked. It created prosperity. It created stability until it didn't, until the political culture in the US curdled into something isolationist and hostile. More than 95% of Canada's energy exports still flow south. That is a staggering number. It is a chokehold. Trump made it painfully clear how dangerous that dependence can be. He showed us that when push comes to shove, the special relationship is just a nice phrase, and American interests will always come first, even if it means crushing Canadian industry. Carney has been explicit about this. Canada needs options. China is not the solution to all our problems. Far from it. But it is part of the solution to the specific problem of having only one customer. As Canada's second largest trading partner, ignoring China is not realism. It is self-sabotage. It is pretending that the world's second largest economy doesn't exist because we don't like their politics. What makes this visit different is how Carney is approaching it. There is a distinct lack of naivety. There is no talk of a golden era like we heard in the Cameron years in Britain. There are no illusions of instant trust or a sudden alignment of values. There is certainly no abandonment of Canadian sovereignty. This is disciplined engagement. It is the diplomatic equivalent of walking and chewing gum at the same time. You cooperate where interests align, like on climate or trade stability, and you hold firm where they don't. You avoid illusions, but you also avoid dependency. That balance is incredibly hard to strike. It requires a level of nuance that is almost impossible to find in our current political discourse. But it is necessary. And frankly, it is why China takes Carney seriously. They know he isn't a pushover. They know he isn't there to sell out Canada. He is there to secure it. Make no mistake, Donald Trump is the invisible presence hovering over this entire trip. He is the ghost at the banquet. His tariffs, his threats, his aggressive isolationism, these are the forces driving Canada and China into the same room. Every move Carney makes in Europe and China and global forums is partly about ensuring Canada is never cornered again. China understands that. They know that Canada is looking for a hedge, and Trump understands it too. A Canada with multiple partners is a Canada that cannot be bullied quite so easily. If we have other markets for our canola, other partners for our auto industry, other sources of investment, then the threat of do what I say or I'll crush your economy loses some of its sting. But we need to manage our expectations. Success from this trip won't come in the form of dramatic headlines or instant breakthroughs. If you are waiting for a press conference where Carney and Xi announce that everything is fixed and the tariffs are gone tomorrow, you are going to be disappointed. There is no single deal that suddenly resets Canada-China relations. The damage is too deep for that. Expecting a miracle would be unrealistic. Real success here is quieter. It is more structural. It is more durable. First, success means restoring direct, trust-based dialogue at the highest level. That sounds boring, but it is essential. For years, Canada and China were talking past each other, shouting through megaphones instead of picking up the phone. This visit reopens channels that allow disagreements to be managed before they turn into retaliation. It puts the adults back in charge of the relationship. Second, success means predictability. Canadian farmers, exporters, and manufacturers don't need perfection. They don't need China to become a liberal democracy. They need to know that the rules aren't going to change every Tuesday. They need stability. If this trip reduces the risk of sudden tariffs or surprise trade actions, that alone is a meaningful win. It gives businesses the confidence to plan more than a week ahead. Mark Carney's visit to China is historic, not because it solves every problem overnight, but because it confronts the reality that the world has changed and Canada must adapt with discipline rather than wishful thinking. This trip is not about choosing sides. It is about ensuring that Canada always has a side of its own, one that is resilient, independent, and capable of standing firm in a volatile world. This is Jacob Friedman signing off.